Come on in, we're going to get going here. Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you all for coming to this latest talk in the Human Tech Speaker Series. We are thrilled to welcome Jennifer Keating from the University of Pittsburgh to our campus. We have kept you very, very busy, and everyone I've talked to who's encountered you has said, wow. So thank you so much for your efforts to come here. It has been an eventful visit, including a lost suitcase in Dallas, which apparently did finally arrive in St. George only a day late. We've had a variety of other things that we can talk about later, but this will be a treat, and I know this is going to be special. All right, so I want to start by thanking Provost Michael LaCourse and the UT Academic Affairs for being the continual co-sponsor of the Human Tech Speaker Series. For this special talk with Jennifer, I also want to thank Vince Brown and the Institute of Politics and Public Affairs for being a third co-sponsor of the event. So we really appreciate your help, Vince. Thank you so much. And Michael, thank you so much. I want to thank the folks in scheduling, specifically Jenny Smith and Tamara Gentry in facilities management for helping out with things. Many thanks to the folks over in the Atwood Innovation Plaza, specifically Jeff Stewart and Bonnie Jensen for a really fun lunch discussion today. I want to thank Isaac Esplin, who's back there pulling his hair out, fighting with YouTube and software. We are going to make this work. All right, Marcus Farnsworth in the Community Education Channel, Sean Denovan in the Community Education Channel, and a special round of applause for the folks at the back table from Book Bungalow who have come in, our local independent booksellers, and they are selling copies of Jennifer's book, AI and Humanity. And I would be remiss if I did not thank the most wonderful, supportive, excellent production team staff that a crazy dean in Southern Utah could ask for. Leslie Twitchell, Cherie Crenshaw, Christina Merrill, our intern, William Holdsworth, thank you so much for all your work to make this happen and all the other things that you make happen in CHAS. It is the College of Events, and I know you hate it, but I love it to death. So thank you so much. All right, to our special guest, Jennifer Keating is a teaching professor and the Writing in the Discipline specialist and the William S. Dietrich II Institute for Writing Excellence at the University of Pittsburgh. Her interests include curriculum design and delivery, collaborative pedagogy, and interdisciplinary teaching. Her work considers writing and artistic practice in societies in conflict or emerging from strife, including Ireland, Britain, South Africa, and the United States, the influence of advancing technology on society, and the politics of language. She is busy. All right. Jennifer earned her PhD in English and Cultural Studies at the University of Pittsburgh and a BA in English and History at the University of Rochester. Please welcome Jennifer Keating.
So thank you for this warm welcome and for everyone to take the time to come here. I'm kind of bewitched by this view. It's incredibly beautiful, so if your gaze wanders, I will not be upset because I can imagine how distracting this view can be. So I'd like to start by saying thank you to Dean Lee, to Provost LaCourse, Associate Dean Cherie Crenshaw, and Leslie Twitchell for all of your preparation with the Human Tech Series. I appreciate the invitation here to join you, and I'm really excited to engage in this conversation with you. The way that I've fashioned my work today is really an extension of the work in the book that I co-authored with my colleague Ela Norbash. I thought it was important for us to continue to extend the conversation and to think about the ways in which today's presentation will hopefully generate some discussion. I've crafted it in such a way that we can really bring in some questions or comments from you all as I make my way through what you will see as a fairly circular presentation. So in Paris's Fashion Week in March 2023, 2023, Boston Dynamics Spot robots captured the show on the Copernic runway. A fashion label known for integrating technological features in the theatrics of their runway shows, Meyer and Vaillant wished to make a statement about the prospect of integrating these systems into all aspects of our lives, from rescue missions on the battlefield to high fashion. As reported in The Guardian, Sébastien Meyer and Arnaud Vaillant, the duo behind the company Copernic, traveled to Boston to meet the creators of the world's most advanced robots. Vaillant said Boston Dynamics was, quote, the first robot company who signed a charter that they would never give weapons to robots, the first who sent robots to Ukraine to clear dangerous bomb sites. He added, quote, ours is a positive message, that humans and technology can live together in harmony. He said, however, that the first time he encountered a Spot, he found it an uncomfortable experience. But now, I think they are just beautiful. As we consider the modern fable of Paris's Fashion Week, or pertinent questions like the use of ChatGPT in our classrooms and workspace, what are the narratives that we tell in this emerging epoch? How do we design tools and systems that meet our needs and protect us from the pitfalls and the inevitable vulnerabilities? How can our curricula in K through 12 education and higher education alike keep pace with advancing technology to ensure its relevance, to offer civic guidance in this age of change, and to document our entry into this next stage of the digital age? In this talk, I want to build off of the preceding talks in the Human Tech series. Scott Hartley's address of the two cultures and the value of the humanist lens in his talk, Human-Centered Approach to Problem Solving, How Do We Make It Real? And Adam Doerr's discussion of disruption and reasons for optimism in the context of uncertainty. In Rethinking Humanity, Optimism Amidst Disruption. As we make our way through my talk, we will continually return to manifestations of the relationships between humanity and technology in relation to power negotiations, humanity and technology in relation to language, and so on. Our time together will be inquiry-driven. We'll articulate questions, we'll refine inquiries, and use these skills in critical engagement and thinking to fashion more precise and sophisticated inroads to the deep, although practical concerns that emerge when we seriously consider how technological tools are increasingly integrated into various facets of our lives. We'll consider how we design tools that acknowledge this integration, its gravity, and its influence, to invoke trust and to signal responsibility and care for human well-being. This is the work that I do with colleagues to inform my writing, and it is especially important in my work with students in the classroom, in AI and humanity, in digital humanity, in art, conflict, and technology in Northern Ireland, and also in my first year seminar, Who's Watching Who. So we're going to engage in some of the practices that really have informed my relationship with students for many years now. We live in a curious moment where the integration of tools, novel exhibitions, and real power shifts between individuals and groups of humans to consequential decision-making by digital and robotic tools are already underway. We might feel threatened, excited, paralyzed by the widening uncanny valley that Vaillant mentions. Perhaps it's scary, or maybe these systems are just beautiful. But how do we mobilize this curiosity into a shared educational experience? How do we build digital fluency and comfort with these rapidly advancing and integrated tools to ensure a robust and dynamic workforce, to benefit from an informed and an empowered citizenry? What are the threats that emerge in this boundary space? How do we evaluate our comfort, our trust with systems to which we increasingly defer decisions? Consequential decisions that can have irreparable implications. How do system designs invoke trust? How do we attribute and take on responsibility for systems that make decisions with consequence? How do we vet systems charged with decisions that are irreversible? So as humanists, we ask questions, ornate questions, probing questions, careful questions, and then we discuss. we consider, we write, and then we just ask more questions. In the Reed Lecture in 1959, Snow decries the divisions of two cultures, but his proposed solution is in education. How can the humanists and the technologists work together to formulate dynamic curricula, to make learning happen in the academy and outside the ivory tower? I think this is our responsibility as educators, but also as citizens, to teach and to continue to learn. So what are the gains of a human-centered educational program? How does this empower graduates? How does this empower the educators? What are the possible technological innovations of a human-centered polytechnic educational program? And how does this influence the tools that are designed in the near and in the far future? These designs are pertinent, needed, and emerging in our teaching and educational design to ensure its relevance and perhaps our civic responsibilities as educators. So the relationships between humanity, power, technology, and language will be shaping our discussion today. They're going to help us to understand how relationships influence our understanding and emerging concerns as these systems enter predictable and unpredictable facets of our work, of our family life, our educational needs, of our everyday work. As we consider the role that technological tools play in our lives, the influence of biomimetics and anthropomorphism in their design and materiality, increasingly our questions about tech point back to the human. Why do we build machines in our likeness? Why is our yardstick for articulating the sophistication of a system a comparison to humans at various levels of intellectual development? What features of our understanding and misunderstanding of ourselves are stitched into the systems that we create? As data journalist Meredith Broussard quips in Artificial Unintelligence, how computers misunderstand the world, oftentimes our trips and challenges with integration of technological tools into different parts of our lives indicates that we, quote, actually have a people problem. The fragility of our understanding of ourselves, the challenges we face in interpersonal relationships or in political and geopolitical contexts are scaled and exacerbated by the systems that we create in an effort to develop fast solutions to some of these problems. The real solutions are unlikely to be tech solutions. These systems are only the tools that we can use to attend to some of these problems. She writes they have a data problem, which is actually a people problem. We tend to think of data as immutable truth, but we forget that data and data collection systems are created by people. Even the best data collection system is useless if there are no people available to manage it. So how can we responsibly use and design tools that attend to people problems rather than scaling and compacting our problems further? As we explore features and concepts of humanity in relation to the tools that we design and engineer, we consider the myriad of challenges that arise in the civic, cultural, and social realms that the tools are actually operating in. Concepts like personhood, citizenship, and responsibility lead inquiry, posing issues like what features of our curricula can help us fashion technologists who consider concerns of equity, race, and gender in regard to the systems that are designed and deployed, anticipating the tensions between intended uses and unintended consequences rather than compounding already vulnerable circumstances. What explorations of categories like personhood, citizenship, and responsibility should be imbued in all educational programming? How can this equip current and future policymakers, engineers, and other stewards of our communities as we navigate new power structures influenced by these advancing tools? So in our work in the coming section, I'm going to break down a little bit of what I mean in regard to these relationships, okay, with humanity really as the central focus. So let's consider the relationship between language and humanity. Responsibility and communication on the actual capabilities of a system. The situations for which it is designed and its intended use can evoke trust and indicate responsibility on the part of the engineers for users, governments, technologies, and investors alike. How precise is the language that we use to describe the systems that are being integrated into our lives? How susceptible are designers to propagating hype in what they imagine their systems might do rather than what they actually do? How vigilant are users in separating the noise of hype from the actual capacities of any technological system? We can consider a recent example that has more or less fallen out of favor, IBM's Watson platforms. As reported in the New York Times in 2021, the program did not quite deliver on the hype surrounding its various launches and publicity. To be fair, the ambitions of the program were quite complex and dynamic across medical data, case law, and other domains. As reported in the New York Times in 2021, already IBM declared in an advertisement the day after the Watson victory, on Jeopardy that is, we're exploring ways to apply Watson's skills to the rich, varied language of healthcare, finance, law, and academia. But inside the company, the star scientist behind Watson had a warning: beware what you promise. David Ferrucci, the scientist, explained that Watson was engineered to identify word patterns and predict correct answers for the trivia game. It was not an all-purpose answer box ready to take on the commercial world, he said. It might well fail a second-grade reading comprehension test. His explanation got a polite hearing from business colleagues, but little more. It wasn't the marketing message, recalled Mr. Ferrucci, who left IBM the following year. Let's consider humanity and power negotiations. As we think about the various technological tools that continue to infiltrate aspects of our lived experience at home and abroad, we're confronted time and time again with the prospect of deferring decisions to a system. We might ask Alexa to play a song at home. Then the system will pull up a similar artist to play another if we've not requested a follow-up tune. The deference is fairly innocuous. Even though the poll of the next title is probably based on our own playlists or past likes or requests, our own personal data, that probing of our personal data might seem particularly benign. But what happens with data used for identification, or identification of prospective combatants in a fluid war zone? What happens if we defer identification of a combatant target to an automated weapon system like a drone? What happens if the corpus used to train the identification component of the AI system is actually incomplete? Does the system give a best answer by conjuring up a, quote, good enough identification of a combatant, and then take deadly action based on good enough information? We have evidence that our intelligence is not always current, and that situations are fluid in formal and informal war zones or regions of conflict. But some of the decisions made by semi-autonomous and autonomous weapons systems might operate in this gray space, perhaps now, perhaps in a very near future, making decisions that lead to dire implications with impartial information or dated data. So something that I find to be really useful in my classes that are usually enrolling technologists alongside developing humanists and social scientists are case studies of particular technologies. So we attend to the capabilities or the evolution of those particular technologies. Our technologists can oftentimes weigh in and describe the systems to develop that sense of fluency for the humanists and the social scientists in the room. And then we can also conjure up a set of concerns that might emerge when we're thinking about how we trust those systems, the ways in which these systems are used for intended use, but also the creative ways in which humans use their ingenuity to work with these different systems. So that kind of case study can be a really rich form of instruction, and it's something that I think lends itself to shared exchange as well, where students and experts alike really do start to have this organic, generative learning experience from one another. So when we're thinking about our relationships between humanity and a range of technological tools, it really offers this rich space for shared learning. So when we're thinking about working with these particular tools, we often find that each system that we consider sprouts its own set of questions pertaining to language, humanity, and power. We can imagine a myriad of cases that allow us to explore these developing and developed relationships to the technological tools, but I oftentimes ask students how these systems affect our relationships to these tools, right? What are the power negotiations between the user and the shift in our relationship to that tool the longer we use it, or the ways in which we use it for different kinds of work or different forms of pleasure? How do the tools and our relationships to them in turn begin to affect our relationships to one another as individuals, but collectively as well? So in the sciences of the artificial, Herb Simon suggests a paradigmatic shift in artificial sciences as he explores the benefits and analysis afforded through the opportunities to simulate, not just speculate or project. In his pioneering work to conceptualize the science of the artificial, he writes, as a matter of fact, there's an interesting parallelism in which I exploit presently between two assertions about computers and simulation. A simulation is no better than the assumptions built into it. A computer can only do what it is programmed to do. There are two related ways in which simulation can provide new knowledge. One of them obvious, the other is perhaps a bit subtle. The obvious point is that even when we have correct premises, it may be difficult to discover what they imply. All correct reasoning is the grand system of tautologies, but only God can make direct use of the fact. The rest of us must painstakingly and fallibly tease out the consequences for our assumptions. Greatly oversimplify the ideas that we already know the correct basic assumptions, the local atmospheric equations, but we need the computer to work out the implications of the interactions of vast numbers of variables, starting from complicated initial conditions. Now, Simon wrote this in, I think, the 1960s. Right, so this is very early in regards to these developing systems in AI. But as we consider the reach of today's system in comparison, still beholden to the premise that a simulation is no better than the assumptions built into it, and that a computer can only do what it is programmed to do, we concede that the assumptions and the programming is more sophisticated and varied and differentiated now than any time in history. That said, there are still great limitations that can be ignored or otherwise unrecognized if we fall susceptible to hype or underestimate the power and the capability of these systems in the present moment. So in artificial unintelligence, Broussard coins techno-chauvinism, a term that captures her concern with perceptions that technological tools are the penultimate solution to complex, what she calls people problems. So she writes, techno-chauvinism is a belief that tech is always the solution. Techno-chauvinism is often accompanied by fellow travel beliefs such as Ayn Randian meritocracy, techno-libertarian political values, celebrating free speech to the extent of denying that online harassment is a problem, the notion that computers are more, quote, objective or, quote, unbiased, because they distill questions and answers down to mathematical evaluation. And an unwavering faith that if the world just used more computers and used them properly, social problems would disappear and we'd create a digitally enabled utopia. Akin to Broussard's critique of tech optimism that can overshadow concerns pertaining to technological development, Professor Barbara Gross, computational scientist and pioneer in CS at Harvard, suggests a set of practices that can hold engineers, designers, and computation scientists responsible for the role that they play in the social and cultural shifts underway in the current technological revolution. She suggests we should not be attempting to replace humans, but we should be building systems to complement humans. It is part of what we are responsible for as scientists. She says our community is too eager to talk about what it can do and too reluctant to talk about what it should do. Gross's optimism and call to action suggests grave responsibility in the role that computational scientists play in the current moment. It's something that the community has now had a few decades to actually grow into. How might we consider this concept of complement that growth suggests? I suggest that we work with the hot concern presently with ChatGPT. So concerns emerging from ChatGPT 3, 3.5, and 4 are everywhere. They're manifesting in particular ways on university campuses that are distinct from other parts of the labor economy, the creative practices in regards to image generation, artistic novel contributions to culture, and other concerns. But let's think and talk a little bit around its capabilities and consider how we might use this system as an object lesson as we explore ways in which we think about these relationships between humanity, power, language, and this particular tool. Okay, so what is ChatGPT? According to OpenAI, ChatGPT is a system still in development, built on language processing in call response configuration. They share that it was trained using reinforcement learning for human feedback, using the same methods as InstructGPT, but with slight differences in data collection setup. They say they trained the initial model using supervised fine-tuning. So human AI trainers provided conversations in which they played both sides, the user and an AI assistant. We gave the trainers access to model-written suggestions to help them compose their responses. We mixed this new dialogue dataset with the InstructGPT dataset, which we transformed into dialogue format. The human contribution to this system, I think, cannot be underestimated. The ways in which the incentive learning model has so many human fingerprints on it, as much as it is an algorithmic system, right? They created a reward model for reinforcement learning, needing to collect comparison data, which consisted of 2 or more model responses ranked by quality. To collect this data, they took conversations that AI trainers had with the chatbot. They randomly selected a model written message, sampled several alternative completions, and had AI trainers rank them. Using these reward models, we can fine-tune the model using proximal policy optimization. We performed several iterations of this process. So something that I find to be really interesting and curious in the emphasis on the human contribution to the model, the trainers, is the humans are just humans, as though all humans are the same, right? There's no bio sheet in terms of giving us an indication of what the positionality might have been of the trainer to that particular set of questions, what expertise or lack of expertise they might have had in the construct of language or the life experience. The other thing that's interesting is that although this system works across some language systems, by and large it was trained in English, and it was information that was by and large, to the degree that we know in regards to the corpus, scraped from the internet, right? So we already have a system that has been taught, at least until we have started to participate in that training process, if you're using ChatGPT, that is already skewed based on what is on the internet, what is in the corpus that they chose to scrape, in addition to whatever biases might have been inherent in the human users, right, that are continuing to develop that. Okay, so as I said, it's primarily trained in English. It's optimized to mimic human speech patterns like syntax, style across various levels of formality and time periods. It's valued for its ability to generate text, complete code, and other forms of automated text based on a, quote, autoregressive model that predicts a future outcome based on previously observed outcomes in that sequence, end quote. So I'm not a computational scientist. Everything that I've been able to gather in terms of thinking about the ways in which this is described, again, is available through OpenAI or other technologists who are willing to guess, basically, how this system was developed based on their own understanding of natural language processing. There's also the ways in which these are trade secrets, right? OpenAI is willing to share some, but not all. And this is particularly pertinent when we're thinking about how it was trained in regards to the corpus. They've listed some information on the corpus used to train the system, but it's not exactly a transparent tell-all memoir in regards to how this text generation is coming about. So how does working with this tool start to bring us back to our understanding of ourselves and our description or narration of the ways in which we're working with these particular tools? So as we build systems like ChatGPT in our likeness in regard to language processing, OpenAI puts a lot of emphasis on the human sensibility or the human features, right, in this call response. Building a predictive and completion function for writing code, to what degree is the system designed to complement humans, as Gross suggests? Or is this an example of techno-chauvinism, a computational replacement for cursory exchange of language, basic information gathering, or basic code writing that can replace features of human labor, whether that's compensated or otherwise? If we're thinking about the ways in which this language processing emerges, would you consider it writing? Is it an autoregressive text generation? Is that writing? If our yardstick for articulating the sophistication of a system is a comparison to humans at various levels of intellectual development, how does ChatGPT measure up, right? The computational scientist working with IBM's Watson compared its natural language processing to the reading ability of a second grader, right? How sophisticated will this system become? And is it just information generation, but unvetted information generation? Or is it just language processing, right? What features of our understanding and misunderstanding of ourselves are stitched into systems like ChatGPT that confuse our understanding of human practices like information sharing, invention, and thinking that we oftentimes associate with writing? And what about truth-telling? In call response and other social binds endemic to the sharing of information, the generation of text and reading practices in social settings, political contexts, and educational environments. We have a complex moment in regards to information sharing and the spread of misinformation or disinformation. When we're working with a system created in our likeness in terms of the seeming readability of the text, how do we negotiate our understanding of the lack of content veracity in something like text produced by ChatGPT, right? How dangerous can that be? So does this tool return us to another manifestation of our persistent people problem? Our ability to identify and explore salient questions pertaining to our individuality, the deep links between language, identity, and rationality, as well as the confusing or perhaps confounding elements of mimicry and simulacra in a system that generates text to sound personable, engaged, and human-like, really does test our conception of ourselves. Its training system and reward scheme are optimized by humans to build out this value system in the development of the tool. But ironically, that effort continues to confound our relationship to that very system, right? In that aim to mimic. So if we consider ChatGPT our most recent iteration of the modern fable that Copernicus stages in this year's March Fashion Week in Paris, what are the stories that we decide to tell? What is the narrative that we command ChatGPT to fashion around this time for us? Is the system writing our moment? Does it mirror and regurgitate our concerns? Does it offer a set of simulated insights despite the constraints of the training processes assumptions? What's it programmed to do? Or is this system offering new insights on the distinctions between the language processing that's distinct to machines and different from us? How will it iteratively grow in its sophistication as we continue to use it and feed that corpus with our own real-time contributions and queries? Might language processing evolve If we know that language is organic and fluid, will it lead to another relationship to these language systems, to permutations in the ways that we use language? Or will we see that the historic paradigm of the ways in which we use language continues to persist, right? These really are unknown. So what's distinct or analogous to our current systems of writing? Writing for summation, writing as thinking, writing as interpretation, writing as creative utterance. So in regards to Simon, we're really thinking about the ways in which ChatGPT offers us something of a simulation, right? It's no better than the assumptions we've built into it, and it can only do what it's programmed to do, right? So we are working within particular constraints, but it seems to me that the constraints are continuing to move and evolve in ways that we don't necessarily have a language, ironically, to narrate, right? So what's distinct or analogous to our current systems in the practice of writing, teaching writing, and other currencies of language? This is something that's front and center on university campuses. I think it's certainly of concern within different domains of labor, and really thinking about the ways in which we use writing and communication as forms of sharing information, right? But the whole point of this system is it's a predictive language system. It's not designed to actually share information, right? We have to feed it the information in order for it to be processed in that way. So how will ChatGPT help us to better understand the roles of writing for something like summation, right? Summary, synopsis. How will it help us perhaps to start thinking about the distinction between writing for summation and writing as thinking, or writing as interpretation, or writing as creative utterance in our cognitive processes, in our academic practice, in our teaching, or in our individual learning? So I asked ChatGPT to respond to a few speculative questions that were printed in our book, AI and Humanity, and this is just an example of one of them. I asked, how does the prospect of machine autonomy alter our understanding of what it means to be human? And ChatGPT spat out, the prospect of machine autonomy raises fundamental questions about what it means to be human. As machines become increasingly capable of performing tasks traditionally associated with human intelligence, such as decision-making, problem-solving, and even creativity, we're forced to reconsider our understanding of human identity and agency. One of the key issues is the relationship between humans and machines. As machines become more autonomous, they may begin to exhibit traits and characteristics that we typically associate with human beings, such as self-awareness, intentionality, and even emotions. This blurs the line between what is human and what is machine, challenging our traditional understanding of human identity and agency. At the same time, the prospect of machine autonomy also highlights the unique qualities and capabilities that make us human, such as our ability to empathize, communicate, and reflect on our own experiences. These are qualities that machines may not be able to replicate, at least not in the same ways that humans can. In summary, the prospect of machine autonomy challenges our understanding of what it means to be human, forcing us to rethink our traditional notions of identity and agency. So consider the repetition of keywords in the short passage, pulling from that query. Okay, so I highlighted these because I thought they were kind of interesting. We can see the repetition of human, the repetition of either agency and identity or some element of that interrelationship. The frequency of machines as well, I think, is noteworthy, just in terms of the ways in which the response pays homage to the query, right? When we ask a question, we want to know that we've been heard. And on some level, this response really kind of goes over the top in terms of that acknowledgement of the question. So we know prospect occurs one time, the human occurs 7 times, machine 4 times, understanding twice, meaning once, and this is all within only a little over 100 words, okay? The refrain of the opening paragraphs of the response is circular, affirming and reaffirming keywords from the prompt. The repetition of human continues through the work, rendering features difficult to read due to its repetition without enhancement of meaningful detail. That's my interpretation of it. In a developing writer, perhaps a reader might consider this a discomfort with content, or a need for further maturity or sophistication in thinking before such detail and style might be developed in the utterance of interpretation or developing analysis. So I'm thinking about the ways in which I would compare this response to something coming from a student who is a developing writer. So a key concern with this set of examples from ChatGPT, is slippage in voice and in point of view, perspective, in the latter parts of the responses. So if we look at this, one of the key issues is the relationship between humans and machines. As machines become more autonomous, they may begin to exhibit traits and characteristics that we typically associate with human beings, such as self-awareness, intentionality, and even emotions. This blurs the line between what is human and what is machine, challenging our traditional understanding of human identity and agency. At the same time, the prospect of machine autonomy also highlights the unique qualities and capabilities that make us human, such as our ability to empathize, communicate, and reflect on our own experiences. These are the qualities that machines may not be able to replicate, but at least not in the same way that humans can. What is a ChatGPT position in these paragraphs? What or who is invoked in phrases like, quote, as machines become more autonomous, they may begin to exhibit traits and characteristics that we typically associate with human beings, such as self-awareness, intentionality, and even emotions. Also consider lines like our ability to empathize, communicate, and reflect on our own experiences. Who are we, and what constitutes our? So ChatGPT offers a rich and dynamic confluence of explorations that allow us to fine-tune our concerns as we continue to explore where technological systems suggest possible replacements, enhancements, and complements to the work that we do, and the tools that we use to navigate our sense of ourselves, our understanding of one another, and also our understanding of the world. Perhaps we can extend the conversation further with a few questions or interpretations of the line of inquiry that I've laid out for you all that are nestled upon one another. Perhaps we can consider how inquiry-driven pedagogical design might be connected to concerns or issues that arise with student use of this system. What happens if a student uses the system in rudimentary courses, but has not gained the sufficient skills and experience and exposure to content to actually take up a latter class if those fundamental skills are lacking? What happens when we think about this notion of replacement instead of complement, especially when we are attempting to build rudimentary skills that then give rise to more sophisticated forms of interpretation, of argumentation, and really interpreting the world around us to make novel as well as expected contributions to civics, to our communities, and to the very companies that our graduates might be working in. So that's all I've got. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yep. And comments are very welcome too, considering you just had to listen to 100 questions.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. You briefly mentioned the uncanny valley, and I'm familiar with that in robotics and animatronics and other visual replications, but I haven't really thought about the uncanny valley in text.
Yeah.
And you pointed it out a little bit where I can start to wrap my head around that, but could you maybe talk about that more, this textual version of the uncanny?
Yeah, I'd be
Valley?
happy to. And for those that are less familiar with the uncanny valley, it's something that happens when we come in contact with a system, whether it's a humanoid robot or biomimetic kind of animal style robot, kind of like the description that the fashion designers described in terms of the discomfort that then moved to admiration of the Boston Dynamics spot bots. It's a cognitive disconnect between what has been built to look like something that's familiar, that oftentimes leads us to categorize it as something familiar, but the behavior or some manifestation within our interactions with that system causes a disconnect and a discomfort, right? Has anyone seen the Sophia robot? I had a photograph of it a little bit earlier. So that's the humanoid robot that was offered citizenship in Saudi Arabia, fashioned as a woman bot, which is everywhere. But there's this great interview with the bot, which is basically a chat bot in terms of the language processing. But the interviewer asks about dreams and whether or not Sophia dreams. And the chatbot function starts to trip up and can't answer the questions that are being asked. So the cover is to talk about how many cat videos are online. Right, and it completely throws the interviewer for a loop who is working in this domain and can't really figure out how to respond because the orientation of that social interaction was something that felt like at least a parody on interaction with a person, but as soon as the script was tripped, it tripped again too, where she starts to speak to the interviewer and she says, hello, blank, instead of the name of the interviewer, because someone didn't script it properly. And so there's these moments where what we thought was present becomes no longer present. But to answer your really excellent question in regards to the interactions with ChatGPT, I think we're starting to see evidence of this discomfort when individuals that are working with ChatGPT start to see the manifestations of hallucination, I think is what they call it, where suddenly the query leads into a domain that the person asking those questions didn't actually command. And I think that just leads to a moment of that kind of uncanny valley. I think there's also ways in which our relationship to text, even as critical readers, oftentimes assigns the language processing to the content in terms of sharing of information. And the notion of ChatGPT generated text making up citations, I think is another version of the academic uncanny valley, perhaps, right? So why would you falsify information if you are producing this communication? And so it's different, I think, from the social aspects of discomfort and then potential admiration that was articulated by the Coperni designers. But I do think that there's a way in which written text and reading practices are a social contract. And I think ChatGPT betrays that social contract. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. About your exercise when you asked ChatGPT the question and you got 107 words back.
Yes.
My question is, what's going to happen if you ask ChatGPT the same question again?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So just like everybody, I'm still trying to learn how this works. But there was an excellent example of that reported by the BBC about 6 or 7 days ago. So within the British context, they fed the medical licensure exam into the system and had it take the exam. And it scored what would be the equivalent of 80%. So, of course, the BBC then goes on to report ChatGPT could practice as a doctor in the national health system. But then they became much more serious because the group that ran this experiment started to ask the same questions 3 times, 5 times, 7 times. And what was deeply troubling is once you move past the first or second query, the statistical run starts to shift, right? And you start to get different answers because it's not set up for truth telling. It's a predictive model, right? So it's looking for the statistical repetition of language clusters, right? Word clusters. So something that I found really, really useful was an example on GitHub that described the sentence, and I shared this in a meeting earlier today. The first person to walk on the moon, ellipses. And the system consistently completed the sentence with mention of Neil Armstrong. But the reason for that is because of the frequency in which those words are clustered and sequenced in that way that tells us that the system is right, but it's not about the fact. It just happens to be that the corpus that it was trained on always completes with that information. It's just the clustering and the ways in which those words happen to go together. So my understanding also is with repeated questions, one of my colleagues in CS had a friend who did it with math questions, and it kept producing errors. And finally, he queried, why do you keep producing errors? And then it wrote back something like, yeah, sorry, I guess I'm not very good at math. Something along those lines, right? And so it was just ridiculous, right? But it's a little bit ridiculous that we would think that the content would be true if we don't actually know what the corpus is, right? Great question. So there was another question up here. Way up here, yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. This is amazing. My name is Brooke, I'm an English professor here, so I was also really struck in the paragraph that you showed about your chat GPT generated paragraph and the pronouns of us and we. And so just to go back really quick to the uncanny valley theory and like this existential crisis that ChatGPT can potentially evoke, and that I feel like we should be genuinely reflecting on, is what I was realizing as you were talking is like, oh my gosh, so ChatGPT is pretending to be a human. But then I remembered that ChatGPT isn't pretending anything because it's not an agent, it has no willpower, it has no contextual awareness, and actually the we is accurate because it reflects the human input of data. And so that is kind of like very, there's like a identification happening with the human AI interaction there that I was like literally realizing as you were talking, and I was like, oh, that's like the meta mirroring thing that is, if we're not pausing to reflect on this, that we just it's just such a little slippage we don't even notice that we're misattributing.
Yeah, and I think it demands vigilance, right? Because the notion that this is a magical system that is evoked and manifest because of advances in programming is only part of the story. Because the mimicry is human produced. And I would like to know more about what those fingerprints look like on the system and the ways in which the digital labor we are providing will manifest in the next iteration of the tool. I do think that this is a perfect example of the need for higher levels of digital fluency so that people understand the ways in which AI is not a generalized system, right? And on some level, OpenAI is not describing the development of this system as crowdsourced labor, right? It's ascribing agency to ChatGPT in its language. So that slippage in terms of what we describe as capability and limitation of capability, I think is one of the most salient concerns. And I also think that it is not clear who is responsible other than everybody to continue to educate ourselves and to think about the ways in which these systems are used. We talked a little bit in one of the conversations I had today about our responsibility as educators to have very frank and open conversations with students about how we might be using these systems and the ways in which we can remember or we can discuss that this is language processing, that this is not content generation, even though it looks like content generation. So, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing either, right? I'll say that explicitly in that the rapidity of that change is both familiar and unfamiliar. And I think that familiarity is also troubling because each time I think I have a handle on it, I realize actually I don't. And that handle is like, you know, like a pinky hook. Like this is not strong capacity to understand or think. It's wild. Yeah.
Hi. You asked,
Yeah.
why do we make these machines? Why do we try to make them look like us?
Yeah.
And should we? And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, okay, for functionality, maybe a robot that's created to provide personal care.
Yes.
Soft skin might be, or a soft derm might be nice because if they're touching a patient or something, then it would feel less foreign, I guess.
Yeah.
But should we be creating them to look like us? And I mean, I guess it's fun just to see how far we could go with it and what we can achieve. But should we be projecting humanism on them?
Yeah, and I really appreciate those observations and thinking quite deliberately about the signal that sends, because each of these systems are usually developed to attend to a particular need or concern. So when we're thinking about care robots, when we're thinking about companion chatbots, usually the need is quite discrete. And a lot of the problems we run into is when we try to generalize the use, right? Cynthia Brazil has done really interesting work in regard to fashioning systems that don't look like anything in the biological world. And she has a couple podcasts on this and some of her rationale and decision for that. And our students really enjoy them because they look like, I think she worked with like the Henson puppet groups to play around with these systems that are kind of cuddly and have sensorial features that are quite attractive depending on the use function for these systems. But they really are attending to a particular need, and she's taken a stance pushing against any form of animalistic or humanoid features in the system she builds.
I
I was thinking when you were responding to Brooke's question about Dorothy standing in front of the Wizard of Oz in the Emerald City, and he's behind the curtain. And then I was thinking of my experience on Chat GPT the other day was just a blank page of text. And I was thinking, well, what if when you went to that interface on AI, instead of the blank page, white with the text on it, there were pictures of the trainers.
Yes.
So you could see that the input you're getting was pre-trained by humans.
Yeah.
And then I understand that the more we use it, the more trainers
Sure.
will be behind every single response we get. So we will see the human input
Yeah.
training the responses. And then could you just talk to me say a little bit about is Chat GPT a narrow AI or a general, artificial general intelligence?
Yeah. So in working with folks in this domain, general AI is this idea that this is a sentient system, right? And that it's analogous, it's distinct, but it's analogous to the level of agency, ability to think, communicate as humans. And a lot of the scientists that I've worked with or interviewed actually think that that's a fool's errand, that we shouldn't be working on that. That said, there are techno-optimists that are really pumping money and effort into that work. But most AI systems are more narrow, right? And that's because they're so hard to build, right? So I think that when we're working within the narrow definitions, that's exactly where we can think about the ways in which ethical standards, not just for transparency, a lot of people ask for transparency so that it's not a black box, but to really think about the making, the contributors who have fashioned this, is a way to continue to insist on the human labor contributed to this, rather than allowing this to seem like a sleek system. I've done a lot of work on theater and features of testimonial theater coming out of conflict zones in Northern Ireland and South Africa. And the ways in which theatrical performance offers an imagined alternative to political constraints is something that I find to be really interesting. The theater of the demo is incredibly fascinating when you actually see how some of these robots are functioning. So I went to Toulouse a number of years ago, and one of the research labs had bought an enormous, very heavy robot, and they were working on gait and movement up and down stairs. And they were giving us a demo, but it wasn't, the shiny video that I was used to seeing. It had an enormous hook at the back. In the demo, it took like 4 or 5 times to get the system to actually do what it was supposed to do. And the engineer was like slightly red-faced, slightly not. I asked about the hook, and he said, we could barely afford this robot. There's no way in the demo we're going to let it fall on its face. And so that notion of performance and the ways in which performance and sleek editing offers us these really kind of best possible scenarios in the demo was something that I found fascinating, because I thought the whole point of these systems was that they were so reliable that they would do it every time. Why would you need a hook? Why would you need all of these safeguards when you were developing a system that looked so sophisticated and smooth?
So thank you for your presentation. Just a quick query, I guess. So would it be accurate to say that ChatGPT functions similarly to like an echo chamber that we see with social media and algorithmic thinking of social media?
I mean, if there's a technologist in the room that can compare that, definitely chime in. But I think that's a worthwhile way of thinking about it, especially in that initial rollout. I don't know if that's true anymore, right? Because it's more porous now in that more people are using it. It's not just the trainers. right? And that original corpus, whatever was in it, was tight, like an echo chamber. And it was time-stamped, I think, only up to like 2021, something like that. But I'm not sure whether or not it's continuing to generate real time, or if they're developing a slightly different system and crowdsourcing that information to build a more robust corpus. I don't know. But I think that that is a fair way of thinking about it initially. Yes?
To kind of relate to what he was saying, you talked about a slippage in algorithms and how they interpret the human experience and variables of the human experience. Do you think that's going to reflect with us too? That we are going to have some slippage and take the machine learning too literally and lose aspects of ourself in the process?
I think it's possible, and I think it really depends on our positionality and how confidently or not confidently we interact with the systems. I think it's a little bit easier for us to be more conscientious about perhaps the way that we want our performance enhanced in using these systems. I can imagine the function of using ChatGPT for a second language communicator to be quite useful if they're really focusing on a particular grammatical structure that has been difficult for them to produce in written work, even though they can identify it when they're reading, for example. That might be considered beneficial if that person is really concerned about accessing opportunity, for example, that's linked to their written communication in the professional realm. But I do think that it's really difficult for us to measure that slippage if we don't actually know exactly what is involved in these systems, right? If we don't fully understand both how they're trained, but the ways in which they're optimized, right? So when we're thinking about the social media concerns, we know that the dopamine hit is actually the motivation behind some of the optimization, right? The whole idea is to hold your attention on the screen, right? And so the generation of the next video on YouTube or continuing to gamify likes, right, in social media holds our attention. That was not advertised when we first started using social media, and it's been this really complicated journey in the ways in which that has now been brought forth with congressional hearings, whistleblowers, and all of that. So I think it's our role as educators to continue to build that fluency, whether it's doing presentations at the public library, right? Or working with our family members who may not have that fluency. And I think it's also our responsibility as individuals to be curious, right? To really figure out to what degree can we learn about these systems, and also what is, using that Wizard of Oz metaphor, what's actually behind the curtain that's being used that we may or may not know about, and asking for information on that, right? Transparency is one way in which that's described, but I think oftentimes we're not just seeking transparency, we want to learn about the very things that affect us. And this is just one of many things that affect us day to day.
So we're going to close down questions now. I want to point out that if you go to ChatGPT and ask it to give you a summary of your book, it'll get it wrong. So the opportunity to purchase the book from our friends at Book Bungalow and get a signature from one of the co-authors is in front of you. Please do that if you could. Jennifer Keating, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.